time now.
Testing. 1, 2, 3. Temperature today is 127 degrees Fahrenheit. The air quality index is at 420.
This place makes me sad.
Heightened chance of large-scale tornadoes.
But it makes Mommy sadder. Mommy says baby brother will be born soon, but that it's not safe for him. Or for me.
Anybody out there? Not go outside.
Mommy and Daddy fight a lot. But they say it's not my fault. Mama? I just hope we can see the sunshine again one day.
This is not the stuff of fiction, nor some far-off threat.
California is in flames. The most destructive wildfire in the history of an entire town.
This is a clear and present danger to life on Earth.
This is uncharted territory.
The strongest to ever hit the Florida
Officials are overwhelmed.
A catastrophe of our own creation. A climate crisis that condemns our children to an ever hotter planet. Their only home ravaged by storms.
At least 36 tornadoes reported.
The record-breaking storm.
Floods.
Many areas will be uninhabitable for months.
Droughts and heat waves.
High temperature records broken by the hundreds.
This is as bad as I've ever saw it.
Wildfires.
9 people are confirmed dead in Northern California.
Disasters that force millions of families to flee. But we have a choice. A once, or perhaps a last in a lifetime chance to rescue the world we know and the hopes of billions not yet born.
You didn't hear a lot of specifics on climate change from the debate because they think that it's too complicated an issue.
We can squander that chance on business as usual, allow corporate cash to cloud our judgment.
We sat down with the executives from Halliburton. They haven't really a benign frac fluid, as you can drink it.
Sell public offices to the highest bidder.
We have ended the war on coal.
Tired politicians tell us to lower our sights,
The Green New Deal, it's a radical move toward a socialist energy and economic policy.
to curb our ambitions, to settle for the status quo.
We're here asking you to vote yes on the Green New Deal. That resolution will not pass the Senate.
They badly underestimate the urgency of this moment and the power of our persistence. We can choose a different path, demand respect for humanity, for all creation, dare a new generation to dream again.
Our house is on fire, and we should get angry.
Seeing my world collapsing around me pushed me to action.
This is not just a native issue.
This is about humanity.
This is a movement driven by our nation's true leaders.
Science should not be partisan.
We're running out of time, so America's got to lead the charge here.
Climate change is one of the most urgent matters of our generation.
A people unfettered by fear.
The eyes of all future generations are upon you.
Those who say it cannot be done should not interrupt those who are already doing it.
What I miss most is the sunshine. But we've been here for a really long time now.
Testing. 1, 2, 3. Temperature today is 127 degrees Fahrenheit. The air quality index is at 420.
This place makes me sad.
Heightened chance of large-scale tornadoes.
But it makes Mommy sadder. Mommy says baby brother will be born soon, but that it's not safe for him. Or for me.
Anybody out there? Not go outside.
Mommy and Daddy fight a lot. But they say it's not my fault. Mama? just hope we can see the sunshine again one day.
My name is Jessica, and I'm a part of the Sunrise Movement Colorado. Over the past few months, our movement has knocked on doors, registered voters, and made phone calls by the thousands, turning out the youth vote in record high numbers before the early presidential primaries. But if we're serious about winning the Green New Deal, we know that the president can't do it alone. We need to win the Senate and elect bench champions who are committed to the Green New Deal and to other progressive priorities. That's why we've chosen to endorse Senate candidate and Green New Deal champion, Andrew Romanoff.
Thank you.
So Romanoff is running against one of the most notoriously dangerous and pro-fracking Democrats, John Hickenlooper. Hickenlooper has poisoned our land, our air, and our water, and if Hick is elected, I'm not only terrified for what that means for my health and safety and my family's health and safety, but for the rich and diverse wildlife that Colorado is home to.
Hey, I want to say thank you. Thank you, and thanks Sunrise Movement. You were the first environmental organization to weigh in on this race. I'm really proud to have your support. I give Sunrise a lot of credit for doing far more to address this climate crisis than the politicians were paying in Washington. And I was having this conversation earlier in the campaign at one of the climate town halls we did at Boulder. At the CU campus, I said, look, you guys are taking the lead. And one of the students I met with said, well, yeah, no kidding, Grandpa. When I say Grandpa, that was just the sentiment. He said, we're going to be here longer than you have, which was, not the kindest reminder, but it's totally true. I mean, we have run out the clock on incremental reform as you need. I think we need bold action. We had to take inspiration from the original New Deal because those are the stakes. This is an existential threat.
I 100% agree. And on that note, so Romanoff is here today because he's ready to win, the vote of my generation and for Coloradans that care deeply about the climate crisis and the intersectional issues that go along with it, that being issues like housing, healthcare, and immigration. So to start off, before this digital town hall, we gathered questions from lots of our partners here in Colorado, that being Indivisible Colorado Environment, the Colorado Rights Immigration Coalition, 350 Colorado, Earth Guardians, and more, to figure out the issues that they care about and that we all want to hear about. So we'll start with some questions on fracking, fossil fuels, and just transition for workers.
That's good.
So the Anti-Fracking Colorado-based organization asked Colorado Rising, as senator, what specific actions would you take to protect communities from the climate and health impacts of fracking?
Well, we could put an end to fracking. We've been having this conversation. I want to make sure I'm saying the same thing to you as we told folks yesterday in Fort Morgan and Greeley and Fort Collins. We did a swing through northern Colorado, and we're traveling all across the state to make it clear that we need to shift as quickly as possible from fossil fuels to renewable energy. Because the truth is, science is showing us what many of residents in Colorado and across the country already know, that there are dangerous consequences associated with fracking and other extractive techniques that have an impact. You can see an uptick in birth defects, a deterioration in air quality, contamination of the water supply. And to be clear, these effects are being borne especially by low-income communities, by communities of color, by places that don't have the political power to resist. So, to my mind, at least, we've run out the clock on incremental reform. We need to take bold action. I support the efforts that Colorado Rising is taking. I think the legislature has moved in this direction and is trying to repair some of the damage of the previous administration. There's a report out literally today, I'll tweet it as soon as we're done, in the Denver Post that shows that the air quality has deteriorated to such a point the EPA has downgraded it just a few months ago to serious. Governor Hickenlooper's administration sought an exemption. Governor Polis decided to withdraw that request. And it's only because I think of pressure from groups like Colorado Rising and yours that we are seeing a more concerted effort to protect our quality of life.
So important. Thank you for touching on that. Our next question is from Jill Dreves from Indivisible Colorado, and she asks, how can we get fracking banned in Colorado and beyond from without leaving workers behind, and how does this fit into your climate platform of the Green New Deal?
Yeah, so look, I want to make sure that we provide a just and equitable transition to this clean energy economy, because I don't want to force anyone, including the people who are working in the oil and gas fields right now, to choose between protecting their paycheck and protecting the planet. We can do both. In fact, there are twice as many jobs to be had in clean energy as there are in fossil fuels.
100%.
The catch is that we got to provide some assistance, some support, some education, some training, and that's why the legislation I support at a federal level, including the resolution of the Green New Deal, describes that kind of transition. Most of the oil and gas workers with whom I've talked in the course of this campaign recognize, unlike the president, that the climate crisis is not a hoax. They can see this shift already taking place because the market is making solar and wind cost competitive with oil and gas. So really the question to my mind is not whether we're going to make this switch, it's when, how quickly we can get there, and whether we're willing to provide help both for workers and for frontline communities along the way.
Yeah, thank you for touching on that. Our next question is also from Jill Dreves, and it states, in the past, you have been at odds with environmental activists in the state in your terms of fracking initiatives and in the state of Colorado. Can you explain your past position?
Well, so there was a measure that then Congressman Polis was pushing into the Constitution on the ballot in 2014. I preferred a statutory solution. If I had it to do over again, I would not have taken Governor Hickenlooper's advice. He proposed a compromise, promised to create some sort of a commission that would work out the differences. That didn't happen, and it's one of the reasons that I supported the initiative that was on the ballot 2 years ago in 2018, support the efforts that the legislature is making, and support the efforts that Colorado Rising is making as well to restrict this practice. Governor Hickenlooper, as you know, sued communities that tried to restrict fracking, literally drank the fracking fluid, it's not a metaphor, and takes money from the fossil fuel industry. I think that clouds his judgment. The only way that we're going to make the shift we need is first by stopping the $650 billion a year in direct and indirect subsidies that we provide for the fossil fuel industry, and second, by stopping the fossil fuel industry from subsidizing Congress.
Yeah.
Because there's clearly a connection.
It's clearly a direct connection.
I think so.
100%, and I could say it does more than cloud his judgment. I mean,
I'm trying to be kind. And yeah, I just think we need to replace Cory Gardner with a climate champion. I mean, we've already got a senator who sits on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee today and takes more money, to my knowledge, from the fossil fuel industry than all but one other member of Congress. So it's a great deal for Cory Gardner, not so much for anybody else.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Well, those are all of our questions centered around fracking. So now we have some questions on immigration. A Colorado member of the Immigrants' Rights Coalition asks, many of us remember you supporting SB 90 and HB 1023. Can you explain what happened with these bills, and do you think that passing these bills was a good idea?
No, I don't. I think it was a good idea. It was a mistake that I'll regret for the rest of my life. And I've said so not just in this conversation, but in public, on TV, on radio, and print for most of the decade now. So SB 90 passed the Senate unanimously. I thought it might be a way for us to take one of the myths about immigration reform off the table. The truth is, despite what the president tells us, immigrants are committing crimes at lower rates than native-born Americans. But that was a mistake for which I'm deeply sorry and will carry that regret for a long time. 1023 was a bill that I sponsored in order to head off a ballot measure that was aimed at the Constitution. It would have stopped the state from providing any services to anybody in the state without proper documentation. Kids, no exemptions for public health or safety. We believed at the time, both Federico Pena, Polly Baca, and the rest of the pro-immigration coalition with whom I was working, that killing that ballot measure and stopping it from reaching the Constitution was the most important goal. If I had it to do over again, I wouldn't have taken that approach. I mean, I was glad that organization blessed our compromise, but I wish we had simply adjourned the session that Governor Owens, a Republican, called, gone home, and dared us to call him back, dared him to call us back into session. I've written about this in the Denver Post and on Medium and other formats, but one of the challenges, I think, if you're running for public office is to acknowledge mistakes, to learn from them, to try to move forward. What hasn't changed for me is a commitment to comprehensive immigration reform. We passed a resolution on my watch to Congress. We sent it out of the state legislature to the members of the House and the Senate from Colorado. We said, you all need to act. You need to provide comprehensive immigration reform. To my mind, that includes a path to citizenship that doesn't take decades on end, protection for dreamers so they're not forced to live in terror, as so many immigrant families are, families who wonder if a knock on the door might tear them apart, end the practice this administration has pursued of caging children and separating families. It's immoral, and it's happening in part because senators like Cory Gardner are happy to indulge the president and too scared to stand up to him or to Mitch McConnell. So this is a deeply personal issue for me, as you know, because my mom and all four of my grandparents are immigrants. So I wouldn't be here if this country hadn't opened its doors to them. And because in my own family, I have a cousin who's an immigrant. This is the only country he's ever known. And when he was going to school in 2016, his classmates started taunting him. They said, when Donald Trump wins, you're going to have to go back where you came from.
Wow.
It is scarring and heartbreaking and dangerous to see both the rhetoric and the policies that have emerged from this administration terrorize so many families across the country, including mine, in that context. And I don't want this president's policies to continue. I don't want Cory Gardner to land a blank check to Donald Trump.
100%. Thank you for sharing. We now have another question around immigration. What would immigration reform and migrant justice look like to you?
So we talked about this a little bit, but
Yeah.
I will tell you, to me, the good news in this debate is if you put a plan like the one I just described, comprehensive immigration reform, protection not just for dreamers, but for those right now who have TPS or temporary protected status, comprehensive reform that means you don't have to wait decades, because you ought to recognize that the folks who are struggling to come here are contributing more to the economy than they are consuming. So immigration is a net boon to America in every way. We're richer economically and culturally and intellectually. The truth is not everybody came by choice, right? Some people came here by chains, some were already here. But our diversity is our strength, and I think that is the value that ought to guide immigration reform. If you put a proposal like that on the floor of the United States Senate next week, I believe it would actually pass because enough Republicans and Democrats have signaled their support. The trouble is that bill won't get to the Senate floor next week or the week after that or ever, as long as Mitch McConnell is in charge and as long as senators like Cory Gardner refuse to demand a vote.
100%. I really like that value diversity is our strength. I believe that's super, super powerful and something to definitely keep in mind. Lastly, we just want to touch on how the climate crisis impacts your stance on immigration and how you incorporate that into your platform.
So there's a clear connection, and you know this, between the pollution that we're creating, especially in rich countries, and the disproportionate impact it's having on low-income countries and low-income communities here in the United States. I told an audience not long ago, you can hardly blame someone for fleeing her home if it's burning, especially if you help set the fire. So we're going to see hundreds of millions of people, more than 1 billion by some estimates, forced to flee their homes because of this climate crisis. They don't at the moment have refugee status under international law, but they should. And more to the point, we ought to be attacking the problem that's driving them from their homes. I think about this a lot because I used to live in Central America. I moved to Nicaragua and Costa Rica after I finished college and taught English, learned Spanish along the way. A lot of the families there in Central America have already been forced to flee because of violence, because of the drug traffic that our own country too often promotes, because of wars that we've helped subsidize, and now increasingly, not just in Central America but throughout the world, because of the carbon emissions, the other greenhouse gas emissions that we're creating, which make these storms and floods and droughts and heat waves and wildfires even more frequent and more destructive. So there's a clear connection. I think it's immoral for us to say, we're going to create this problem, or at least contribute in large part to it, and then we're going to close the door and stop you from actually seeking help or receiving it. So I think we ought to address this problem in both senses.
I agree. Next, we have a question from the Colorado Youth Director of Earth Guardians, and it asks, from the time of settler colonialism, Indigenous peoples have embodied the Green New Deal in their fight against the exploitation of the environment and the exploitation of human labor. How does your Green New Deal platform incorporate Indigenous rights into sovereignty and to solutions-based policy?
It's a really important question, and I'll just quote from the language of the Green New Deal itself, because it requires obtaining the free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples for all decisions that affect Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories, honoring all treaties and agreements with Indigenous peoples, which obviously the United States has not done, and protecting and enforcing the sovereignty of land rights of Indigenous peoples, we ought to recognize, it seems to me, that Native Americans have a better track record of protecting the environment and living with the environment that they are themselves conserving than the United States has demonstrated in its own federal policies. And clearly, to me, the genocide of the Native American population is one of America's two original sins. So it's going to take us a long time to remedy that tragedy. And we could start by adopting the language in the Green New Deal and making it the basis of federal legislation.
I agree. That's awesome. Thank you. A member of the Sunrise Movement now asks, as senator, how will you organize the environmental justice movement, labor movement, and other actors to build robust coalitions to achieve the vision of the policies of the Green New Deal over the next decade?
This is I should start, I guess, by saying that this is a real difference in the race for the U.S. Senate. John Hickenlooper not only opposes the Green New Deal, he compares a lot of the progressive priorities that we share to these are his words, the discredited ideas of Karl Marx and Joseph Stalin. It's the kind of attack you expect to hear from a Republican like Cory Gardner, not from a Democrat. So the good news, to me, is that we could create millions of good jobs in building the clean energy infrastructure we need to make this switch from fossil fuels to renewable energy. I mentioned earlier the original New Deal, which was a time when the U.S. faced a Great Depression, a Second World War. We had to literally put the country on war footing. And what we're talking about here is a similar national mobilization to attack this climate crisis. But you don't even have to go back all the way to the 1930s or the 1940s. You can look to 1961. That was the year that a young American president addressed the nation and vowed before the decade was done to land a man on the moon and return him safely to the earth. JFK didn't live long enough to see that happen, but it did by 1969. So I look at this as our moonshot. I mean, this is I've taken to calling it a last-in-a-lifetime opportunity to rescue life on Earth and inspire folks, just like JFK did, to take an interest in the fields that are going to be necessary to create this transition. So we could get good jobs, better health, better air quality, cleaner water, and help families live in a sustainable future.
Which is what we all want.
I think so. I mean, I hope so.
Exactly what I hope we all want, and I love that, the moonshot. This next question hits kind of close to home. So the 80216 zip code, home to Globeville and El Rio Swanza neighborhoods, which is home to the River North Arts District, which is Rhino, is listed as one of the most polluted zip codes in the country. How does your climate plan address the poor air quality in these neighborhoods and across the Front Range?
Well, we got to call this what it is. It's environmental racism. I mean, the climate crisis is not just an environmental crisis. It's a moral crisis, in part because of what you just described. The fact is that a lot of the lowest income communities in our state and around the country are bearing the brunt of air pollution and oil and gas development because they don't always have the political power to fight back. So we have to do everything we can, not just to end fossil fuel, but also to protect the communities that are suffering the most. And in part, that suffering comes from decisions made by Governor Hickenlooper's administration. They approved a permit by Suncor to emit something like 25,600 pounds of hydrogen cyanide. Governor Polis is reversing some of the decisions that his predecessor made. But there's a lot of people who are hurting along the way, and part of the obligation that I take from the Green New Deal is to mitigate the damage, to protect communities, to help workers, and to make sure that kids can safely breathe the air and drink the water in these communities and throughout the country.
100%. And we do just want to touch on that Hickenlooper has dodged every single opportunity to have a one-on-one debate with Andrew. So it's really awesome and important that we created this opportunity to get your stance on it today.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, there's 10 Democrats running for the nomination, as you know, but he's, I guess, not interested in a 9-on-1 conversation either. I mean, John has avoided 19 debates now. It's really almost disqualifying to say, look, Regis, Metro, Colorado College, UCCS, the NAACP, the Progressive Veterans down in El Paso County, every group invited all of us. Most of us came. And John has refused to appear or to send a surrogate or usually even an explanation other than to cite scheduling conflicts. I think that excuse has run out. And I guess it's because if you can't defend your record, you don't want to show up in public or articulate your positions. I don't know, to be candid, how we would beat Cory Gardner if we nominate someone unwilling to debate other Democrats. I served with Cory in the State House for 4 years, as you know. I'm the only candidate with any legislative experience in this race. And you can say what you want about Cory Gardner, and we do. But he is a very nimble debater. And it seems to me if Governor Hickenlooper is unwilling to debate us, he's not likely to fare well in a debate against Cory Gardner. It's also telling, I think, we had this conversation last night in Fort Collins, that John said, I don't want to be a senator. He said, I wouldn't be good at it. He said, I would be terrible at the job. I believe him.
So we want to further these questions. We have some questions from the audience today. Thank you guys for submitting these. First question being, what other progressive priorities distinguish you from Mr. Hickenlooper?
Healthcare. I think you know this, I ran a mental health organization for the last 4 years. So I've fought for families like mine who have faced mental illness or drug addiction or suicide. I don't want anybody to die on account of problems like that we can fix. And I'll just share with you a story if we have the time, because I know it's easy to be lost in the conversation about the 28 million Americans who are uninsured or the 44 million who are underinsured. I met a dad when I was running Mental Health Colorado whose son had depression, deep depression. He experienced a bout of psychosis. He needed treatment. His dad's insurance plan was supposed to cover it. Most plans, at least by law, are required to provide equal coverage for mental health and physical care. But any law is just a paper promise unless you actually enforce it. And when the dad submitted a claim, the insurance company denied it. So the dad appealed the decision, and the company said no, and the dad appealed again, and the company said no. This went on for months until his son killed himself at the age of 14. 3 weeks later, his dad got a letter in the mail from the insurance company reversing its decision and agreeing to cover his late son's treatment. So for me, I will tell you, just speaking not as a candidate, but as a human being, it is profoundly painful to have conversations with moms and dads who have lost their kids, not just to a brain disease that we can treat, but also to the indifference of an industry that bases its profits on its ability to exclude as many sick people and deny as many claims as possible. That's the business model. It's a great model if you're an insurance company. It's a pretty lousy model for the rest of us. Yeah. So I support a plan that most folks call Medicare for All, by which I mean strengthening Medicare, adding benefits like dental and vision and hearing and long-term care, increasing reimbursement rates, especially for rural providers and other folks who work in underserved communities, and then lowering the age of Medicare eligibility to 0, which was actually the original game plan. I mean, thank goodness if you get to be 65, you get coverage that can never be taken away. But what if you're 64, 63, 62? What if you're 26 and you just aged out of your parents' plan? Yeah. I mean, that's a huge problem too. So my take is we ought to stand up to the insurance industry and the drug companies and make sure all Americans benefit from high-quality health care, including mental health and substance use treatment. Governor Hickenlooper, to answer your question, opposes that plan. Like most of these progressive priorities, he parrots the talking points of the insurance industry, and I just don't think that's the way to go.
I agree. And the steps you're describing can help avoid the story you just shared.
Well, that's the goal, right? I mean, I know that we're not going to be able to stop every tragedy, but when you have one of the highest suicide rates in the nation, as Colorado does, when suicide becomes the leading cause of death among adolescents in our state, as it is, surely saving some lives would be better than none. Yeah. And I just don't want any other family to go through this.
100%. Thank you for sharing that, Andrew. So our next question, this is a great one, golden one. How will you beat Cory Gardner?
Yeah, well, that's a priority that I share. So the good news, I have some good news. There's a poll out just last week that shows Cory Gardner losing to even a generic Democrat by 11 points. I obviously believe we should demand more than a generic Democrat. We should pick somebody who carries the courage of our convictions to Washington. But Cory's approval rating has fallen, I think, even before the impeachment trial, to about 34%. And I don't think the impeachment trial improved his standing. So he is literally the most vulnerable Republican in the U.S. Senate. This is the seat most likely to flip from red to blue. I think to beat him, we need a few things. We need a compelling message. That's why we're trying to lay out a bold, aggressive, progressive agenda. We need messengers like you and Sunrise and other supporters across the state to help us carry that message. And then, to be perfectly blunt, we need money. I mean, that's one place where we're lagging Cory and Governor Hickenlooper. We don't have as much money as they do. I know this is not a fundraising appeal, but if folks are interested in learning more, or chipping in their time or talent or treasure, they can go to AndrewRomanoff.com. In order to get on the ballot and have a chance to win the Democratic nomination and then beat Gardner, we need to get at least 30% of the vote at the state assembly. That takes place in April, but the caucuses are coming up on March 7th. I know nobody would design this system from scratch, but the way this works is of the 10 candidates who are running, half of us are going through the caucuses, and we need to get everybody we can to show up on Saturday, March 7th at 2 p.m. at a precinct caucus location near you. You can find the details on our website if you go to andrewromanoff.com/caucus, andrewromanoff.com/caucus. If you're a registered Democrat, you can participate. If you're an unaffiliated voter, you'll have a chance to cast a ballot in June because the primary ballot will be mailed to all the Democratic and unaffiliated voters in the state. So I'm quite eager to meet the challenge that this question describes. I'm the only candidate in this race who's actually debated Cory Gardner and beaten him in that sense on the House floor because I spent 4 years in the legislature with him.
Thank you for sharing. Our next question: how can young progressives help in this moment?
Well, you can join Sunrise. I think that would be one way to help. And you can join our campaign. We need folks to knock on doors, make phone calls, send texts and emails, host events. We have some parties coming up. You can find those details at andrewromanoff.com/events. I have a party pretty much every night here somewhere in the state. We need people to carry this cause because, as the student I mentioned earlier, CU Boulder pointed out, y'all are going to be here longer than I am, and that's why I take inspiration from you.
Yeah, and speaking from a young progressive standpoint, it is so important that we take every opportunity we can because it's not just one candidate or one president that's going to be able to win this larger fight. And Sunrise is very involved in helping Andrew and phone banking for Andrew, so if you want to check out Sunrise, Colorado. Our next question: tell us something about yourself that people don't know.
Some people don't know that I have a twin sister. She is 7 minutes older than I am, which she would tell you were the best 7 minutes of her life before I came along and ruined it all for her. And I love her a lot. And if she's watching somewhere, hi. We had a secret language as kids, like a lot of twins do. And for some reason, people keep asking me when I tell them I have a twin sister if we're identical, so I need to give them a little biology lesson. People are a little unclear on the concept of twins. People always tell her she looks nothing like me, and she always says thank you. She's a brat.
Thank gosh. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Little fun facts. Our next question: what can we do to make sure kids are safe at school?
Yeah, I'm glad to whoever asked that question, and I'm sorry that you had to ask that question, and I'm sorry that kids can't go to school knowing that they'll be safe or will come home at the end of the day in too many schools across the country. I mean, this is staggering, and it's not just kids. We're losing 100 Americans a day to gun violence. We've laid out a plan, I guess I should have mentioned earlier, so on all these issues, on healthcare and the environment, and education, the economy, on women's rights, on human rights and equal rights, and on a number of other issues, we've laid out a platform at andrewromanoff.com/priorities, andrewromanoff.com/priorities. On gun violence, we've laid out a 10-point plan to try to reduce the death toll. And it's an issue that is also pretty personal to me and my family.
It's close to home for everyone in Colorado.
It does. I mean, I lost a first cousin who was like my kid sister to suicide 5 years ago, which is suicides account for about 2/3 of gun deaths in America. So if we are serious about protecting our kids, we will make it harder for folks who shouldn't have weapons to get them. We will arm our teachers not with guns. I mean, that is idiotic and dangerous. But instead with what they are asking for, which are mental health resources, counselors, nurses, psychologists, social workers, training to spot some of the early warning signs. We'll engage parents and families and communities in this conversation. We'll take steps that Cory Gardner has been unwilling to take because he won't stand up to the NRA. And why should he? I mean, the NRA is spending $4 million to keep him in office. He's the 5th biggest beneficiary of gun lobby money in the entire Congress. So universal background checks, which more than 90% of the American people support, Cory Gardner has refused to endorse or demand a vote. A ban on military-style assault weapons, Cory Gardner's no. Even stricter enforcement of existing laws, like the ban on straw purchases. There's a law in the books that says you can't buy a gun on behalf of somebody else. That's illegal, but we need to enforce that law. And I will tell you, just because we're talking a little bit about gun violence, this is a point of difference in the primary as well. I know that John Hickenlooper is bragging about taking on the NRA, but the truth is, after he signed a ban on high-capacity magazines, he was confronted by a group of opponents, the county sheriffs of Colorado, some of whose conservative members were against that bill, and described it as essentially worthless. And you can watch the video. It's breathtaking, actually. I've never heard a governor behave like this. When one of the sheriffs said the law you signed is essentially worthless, Governor Hickenlooper started by saying, well, I wouldn't argue with you. He said, I only signed that law because one of my staff members promised that I would. And we didn't really think it was going to pass anyway. And then he said, if I had known how much it was going to divide the state, I might not have signed it in the first place. That's not a profile in courage. And it makes you wonder, when you're up against the gun lobby, as you will be if you're in the Senate of the United States, will you actually stand up for the people of your state who are being slaughtered? Or will you fold like he did, like John did in that circumstance? I've known 5 governors now, worked for one of them, and I've never heard a governor blame a staff member for forcing him to sign a bill. I have nothing good to say about that exchange. And since John Hickenlooper won't appear on a debate stage with me or any of the other Democratic candidates, I don't know how he possibly can defend that performance either.
None of us do. Our next question is as follows. What does a livable future mean to you?
Well, it starts with a world that we can inhabit. I've heard Sunrise and other folks make this case that, we all want a strong economy and a world-class education system and healthcare, but if you don't have a planet that you can live on, it's going to be hard to achieve any of those other priorities. We put together a video, as you know, it's on our website at andrewromanoff.com. You can check it out. That portrays the opposite of a livable future, a world where temperatures are climbing, a world like many folks live in now, especially the folks who've been victims of this climate crisis, from Indonesia to Australia, from the Bahamas to California. You can see the devastating effects. So I want to make sure all of us are able to breathe the air and drink the water and survive on this hotter and hotter planet. I want to reduce the increase in global temperatures and slow the rise of the sea levels. I tell folks, even if you didn't care about our ability to survive on Earth as humans, you might take some sympathy for the other million species we've driven to the point of extinction. They didn't sign up for this.
No, they did not.
But they don't get a right to vote. We're the only animals who do.
100%.
And it's a good thing, because if they could, those other animals would probably vote us off of this global island. So yeah, I think it's the whole ballgame. If you live on Earth, this needs to be your top priority. There is no planet B, as the hashtag has it. And that's why I'm all in on a Green New Deal.
Because on both sides of the aisle, an issue that affects us all.
Yeah.
And that should be the finale to all of our questions. Thank you guys for submitting your questions and tuning into this town hall with Andrew today.
This just in.
You do have one more question, it seems.
No, it's an invitation, actually.
Oh.
So if you want to join us for a caucus kickoff party, I mentioned the caucuses are coming up on Saturday, March 7th at 2 p.m., but you don't have to wait till then to share the fun. You can join us tomorrow that's Saturday, February 29th at 3 o'clock at 1570 North Clarkson Street in Denver, 1570 North Clarkson. And if you lose the details, just go to andrewromanoff.com/events. You'll find the details of this party and all the other parties that we're having. And if you want to hold a party of your own, you can sign up to do that on the website too, to host or co-host an event. We're really trying to reach as many voters as we can in person before this election takes place. It's a point of contrast, not just to Cory Gardner, who hasn't held a town hall meeting in almost 2.5 years, but also to Governor Hickenlooper, who doesn't seem to enjoy the opportunity to meet his constituents or prospective constituents either. So I hope you'll come to our party tomorrow, Saturday, 3 o'clock, 1570 North Clarkson. It's a dance center, but that doesn't mean you're going to be subjected to me dancing, because we actually want people to come. And if you contribute enough money, I'll stop dancing. That's my promise to you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Lovely talking to you. Thanks
Thanks
guys.